All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam Granth Raj ki jai.
Jai.
Lord Premanandi
Hari
Haribol.
Hari.
So today we are hearing from Canto 3, Chapter 15, and we're going to start from the beginning again. Text 45, 3:15:45. And it says, "This is the form of the Lord, which is meditated upon by the followers of the yoga process, and it is pleasing to the yogis in meditation. It is not imaginary but factual, as proved by great yogis. The Lord is full in 8 kinds of achievement, but for others, these achievements are not possible in full perfection." Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The success of the yoga process is very nicely described here. It is specifically mentioned that the form of the Lord as four-handed Narayana is the object of meditation for the followers of Yoga Marga. Marga means the path of yoga. In the modern age, there are so many so-called yogis who do not target their meditation on the four-handed Narayana form. Some of them try to meditate on something impersonal or void, but that is not approved by the great yogis who follow the standard method. The real yoga marga, marga means path of yoga, process is to control the senses, sit in a solitary method, in a solitary and sanctified place, and meditate on the four-handed form of Narayana, decorated as described in this chapter as he appeared before the four sages. This Narayana form is Krishna's expansion. Therefore, the Krishna consciousness movement, which is now spreading, is the real topmost process of yoga practice. Krishna consciousness is the highest yoga performance by trained devotional yogis. Despite all the allurement of yoga practice, the 8 kinds of yogic perfections are hardly achievable by the common man. But here it is described that the Lord, who appeared before the four sages, is himself full of all 8 of those perfections. The highest yoga marga process is to concentrate the mind 24 hours a day on Krishna. This is called Krishna consciousness. The yoga system, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, or as recommended in the Patanjali yoga process, is different from the nowadays practice Hatha yoga, as it is generally understood in the Western countries. Real yoga practice is to control the senses, and after such control is established, to concentrate the mind on the Narayana form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. That's Narayana form is with 4 hands. Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all the other Vishnu forms with 4 hands, decorated with conch, lotus, club, and wheel, are plenary expansions of Krishna. The word plenary means complete, absolute, or complete. Are plenary expansions of Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, so you can see Krishna can expand himself infinitely. Nobody else can do that. In Bhagavad Gita, it is recommended that one meditate upon the form of the Lord. To practice concentration of the mind, one has to sit with the head and the back in a straight line, and one must practice in a secluded place, sanctified by a sacred atmosphere. The yogi should observe the rules and regulations of brahmacharya. In other words, the yogi has to be chaste, to strictly live a life of self-restraint and celibacy. One cannot practice yoga in a congested city, living a life of extravagancy. That means overindulgence of sense gratification, including unrestricted sex indulgence and adultery of the tongue. The adultery of the tongue is eating horrible things like meat and so forth. Yoga practice necessitates controlling the senses, and the beginning of sense control is to control the tongue. One who can control the tongue can also have control over the other senses. One cannot allow the tongue to take all kinds of forbidden food and drink and at the same time advance in the practice of yoga. It is a very regrettable fact that many unauthorized so called yogis come to the Western countries and exploit people's inclination towards yoga practice. Such unauthorized yogis even dare to say publicly that one can indulge in the habit of drinking and at the same time practice meditation. Yeah, one time there was this yogi. He was a Muslim, but he was uh, going around as a famous yogi, and after his so-called lecture, uh, his disciples brought him a um, a cigarette and something to drink. And I'm not sure what it was. What he was supposed to drink. I was really surprised when I saw that. Now, the only reason I went to see this man is because I have a friend of mine who was a follower of him, and he insisted that I go with him to see this yogi, like, thinking that I'm going to go and I'm going to be overwhelmed by the yogi and become his disciple. So when I saw that, after he gave his speech, you couldn't even understand what he was saying. After the speech, one of his disciples comes with a cigarette, and I think there was coffee. And he gave it to him. So, and I was dressed, at that time I had my shaved head, and I was dressed as a devotee. And so gets up from after giving his lecture, and the hall was filled with a lot of people. And he walked straight to me, you know, and he came right up to me, next to me, and he went like this to my bead bag, you know. He looked at me, said, "What is this?" I said, "It's my beads." And went like this. He said, "This is not good." So there was like, maybe, I don't know, 80 people in the room, right? So I just ignored what he said. I mean, I didn't say anything, I was really surprised because he walked straight to me. He had to walk some distance, and he went like that, just patting my bead bag. And then he walked away. And then everyone came around and said, "Oh, Guru Dev, you got the mercy of the Guru Dev." I felt like I was contaminated. I didn't feel like it was any mercy. So this is the world of illusion. People think he was a great yogi. He wasn't a great yogi. And they did bring it while he was still so-called sitting on his asana. At the end of his lecture, they brought him a cigarette and something to drink. I don't know, maybe it was whiskey. I don't know what it was. And he took a couple puffs and then he drank whatever it was. And the friend that forced me to come with him to see this guy, uh, he thought like, oh, it was the greatest lecture I ever heard in my life, blah blah blah. And then I realized my friend is completely in illusion, you know. And then the fact that he came up to me and he patted my bead bag like this, it's like really intimidating. And he said, "This is not good." So this is what we're up against in this world. There's so many fake so-called yogis and so-called incarnations of God, and it's bewildering. It's absolutely bewildering for most people. Okay, so we continue, and it says the yoga system, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, or as recommended in the Patanjali yoga process, is different from the nowadays practice Hatha Yoga as it is generally understood in the Western countries. Real yoga practice is to control the senses, and after such control is established, to concentrate the mind on the Narayana form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all other Vishnu forms with 4 hands decorated with conch, lotus, club, and wheel are plenary expansions of Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, it is recommended that one meditate upon the form of the Lord. To practice concentration of the mind, one has to sit with the head and the back in a straight line, and one must practice in a secluded place, sanctified by a sacred atmosphere. The yogi should observe the rules and regulations of brahmacharya to strictly live a life of self-restraint and celibacy. One cannot practice yoga in a congested city, living a life of extravagancy, including unrestricted sex indulgence and adultery of the tongue. Yoga practice necessitates controlling the senses, and the beginning of sense control is to control the tongue. One who can control the tongue can also have control over other senses. One cannot allow the tongue to take all kinds of forbidden food and drink and at the same time advance in the practice of yoga. It is a very regrettable fact that many unauthorized so-called yogis come to the Western countries and exploit people's inclination toward yoga practice. Such unauthorized yogis even dare to say publicly that one can indulge in the habit of drinking and at the same time practice meditation. When it says drinking, it's referring to like beer and whiskey and things like that. 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna recommended yoga practice to Arjuna. But Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and regulations of the yoga system. And that's a fact. Arjuna never did yoga, never did the asanas or anything like that, but yet he's considered uh, a yogi, So what kind of yoga are we talking about? Mm-hmm. Controlling the senses and the mind and strictly following Krishna's instructions. 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna recommended yoga practice to Arjuna, but Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and the regulations of the yoga system. One should be very practical in every field of activities and should not waste his valuable time in practicing useless gymnastic feats in the name of yoga. Yeah, basically, when it says useless gymnastic feats, you're supposed to like bend your body like a pretzel. You know what a pretzel is? You ever seen a pretzel? Yeah, it's all. Okay. What a pretzel is.
I don't know what a pretzel is, but I've seen some like girls in my school. They're just doing that all day.
What's that? What are they doing?
Like yeah, gymnastics pretty much.
Like what?
They're flexing their
body?
Yeah, their body.
Okay.
They're turning their body inside out to walk on their feet and their hands.
Like a monkey. Okay. Well, good for them. Okay. So the yogi should observe the rules and regulations of brahmacharya to strictly live a life of self-restraint and celibacy. One cannot practice yoga in a congested city, living a life of extravagancy. That means, you have all kinds of expensive and um sense gratification, including unrestricted sex indulgence and adultery of the tongue. So adultery means you violate the principles uh, of Krishna consciousness. So adultery of the tongue would be it's a very nice way of saying they're meat eating and eating horrible things. So I'll tell you something very interesting, and we can look it up on the internet. Uh, you know how little young boys, sometimes girls, they make dares. I dare you to eat this. So a group of kids were together, and there was a dare, for this one boy to eat a slug,
Okay.
right? And he did it. He ate the slug. Look it up. Boy eats a slug, uh, and then you have a picture of him right before he died. He ate the slug, and then in a couple of days he died, right? And he was a nice boy, you know, handsome boy. You have the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a rugby player.
Does it show what he looked like when he ate the slug? Okay.
That was
Like this.
And he became paralyzed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Show that to everybody. So that's what happens if you eat a slug. You become basically a vegetable, and then he died. And it was on a dare. So all you young kids, you should understand, don't be intimidated by a bunch of kids that dare you. Oh, I dare you to eat the slug. And then you say, oh man, it's a deer, I gotta eat it. No, those are like really nasty things. And sometimes, the kids get hurt by these dares, and there's an example of it right there. Okay. The yogi should observe the rules and regulations of brahmacharya to strictly live a life of self-restraint and celibacy. Celibacy means no sex. One cannot practice yoga in a congested city, living a life of extravagancy, including unrestricted sex indulgence and adultery of the tongue. I like these phrases the Prabhupada makes. Adultery of the tongue. That means that you're subjecting your tongue to eating horrible things like meat and fish and crabs and lobsters and all horrible things. Um, so one who can control the tongue can also have control over the other senses. One cannot allow the tongue to take all kinds of forbidden food and drink and at the same time advance in the practice of yoga. It is a very regrettable fact that many unauthorized so-called yogis come to the Western countries and exploit people's inclination towards yoga practice. Such unauthorized yogis even dare to say publicly that one can indulge in the habit of drinking and at the same time practice meditation. 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna recommended yoga practice to Arjuna, but Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and regulations of the yoga system. See, Arjuna, who's the greatest yogi, never did all the yoga asanas and so forth. So that's very important to understand that. But he did the real yoga. The real yoga is following Krishna's instructions. In the case of Arjuna, he was trained to be a kshatriya, a fighter, and a killer, but not indiscriminate killing. He would only kill on the basis of Sanatana Dharma, uh, kill the bad people, not never, kill people in order to, take over their house or their money or a country or something like that. Arjuna was strictly following instructions of gurus. So he wasn't like a thief or a dacoit. 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna recommended yoga practice to Arjuna, but Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and regulations of the yoga system. One should be very practical in every field of activities and should not waste his valuable time in practicing useless gymnastic feats in the name of yoga. Real yoga is to search out the four-handed super soul within one's heart and see him perpetually in meditation. So yeah, I mean, we've done this before. Let's do it again. Look up the definition of yoga, and you'll see it's completely different than what Prabhupada is explaining here. And as usual, there are many misleading definitions in the dictionary. What does it say? Prabhupada says, and one should be very practical in every field of activities and should not waste his valuable time in practicing useless gymnastic feats in the name of yoga. So what does it say?
I don't know, but a spiritual discipline based on an extremely subtle science which focuses on bringing harmony between mind and body.
Well, that's not. Any other definitions?
This is from the Oxford Dictionary.
Yeah.
It's a Hindu spiritual and ascetic discipline, part of which
Oh, by the
includes
way, that's not true that it's Hindu. Yeah, right there is a mistake. But go ahead.
a part of which including breath control, simple meditation, and adoption of specific bodily postures is widely practiced for health and relaxation.
That's a completely misleading definition. It's wrong. Okay. 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna recommended yoga practice to Arjuna, but Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and regulations of the yoga system. One should be very practical in every field of activity and should not waste his valuable time in practicing useless gymnastic feats in the name of yoga. Real yoga is to search out the four-handed super soul within one's heart and see him perpetually in meditation. So that's now we can see that the definition of yoga in the the dictionary is wrong. This is the right definition. Real yoga is to search out the four-handed super soul within one's heart and see him perpetually in meditation. So Krishna is present in our hearts as Narayana with four arms. And when we can meditate and see Narayana in our heart, we've achieved real yoga. Such continued meditation is called samadhi. And the object of this meditation is the four-handed Narayana with bodily decorations as described in this chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. If, however, one wants to meditate upon something void or impersonal, it will take a very long time before he achieves success in yoga practice. We cannot concentrate our mind on something void or impersonal. Real yoga is to fix the mind on the form of the Lord, the four-handed Narayana, who is sitting in everyone's heart. So first of all, you can meditate by looking at the picture of Narayana with four hands. And eventually, you can actually see in your heart the presence of Narayana with four hands. This takes time. It's not overnight. And you have to be completely celibate, and you have to stay in a place, and it has to be a holy place. you can't meditate while the television is on or anything like that. And you have to be very careful about what you eat. And you have to have a straight back and sit in the proper way, in a sauna. And it's quite rigorous, and you have to be very patient. That's why Arjuna frankly expressed his inability to follow the stringent rules and regulations of the yoga system. But yet Arjuna is considered to be the greatest yogi. Now let's find out why. One should be very practical in every field of activities and should not waste his valuable time in practicing useless gymnastic feats in the name of yoga. Real yoga is to search out the four-handed supersoul within one's heart and see him perpetually in meditation. Such continued meditation is called samadhi, and the object of this meditation is the four-handed Narayana with bodily decorations as described in this chapter, Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, they don't mention anything about Narayana in the definition of yoga, right? That you see in the dictionary. If, however, one wants to meditate upon something void or impersonal, it will take a very long time before he achieves success in yoga practice. We cannot concentrate our mind on something void or impersonal. So you see, although Prabhupada says it would take a very long time, in the next sentence he says, we cannot concentrate our mind on something void or impersonal. Real yoga is to fix the mind on the form of the Lord, the four-handed Narayana, who is sitting in everyone's heart. By meditation, one can understand that God is seated within one's heart. Even if one does not know it, God is seated within the heart of everyone. Not only is he seated in the heart of the human being, but he is also within the hearts of cats and dogs. Bhagavad Gita certifies this fact by the declaration of the Lord Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hridaya. So Ishvara is Lord, Sarvabhutanam, all living entities, and Hridaya, the heart. So Krishna is in the heart of every living entity. So in other words, if you see a dog is a walking and barking mandir because he has Krishna in his heart. So this is real vision, to see the presence of the Lord in the heart of every living entity. Therefore, we should never hurt any living entity. That includes ants, and that includes anything and anyone. The Ishvara, the supreme controller of the world, is seated in the heart of everyone. Not only is he in everyone's heart, but he is also present within the atom. No place is vacant or devoid of the presence of the Lord. That is the statement of the Isha Upanishad. Yeah, the Lord is present everywhere. God is present everywhere, and his right of proprietorship applies to everything. That means that God is the proprietor of everything. Therefore, we should not accept anything over and above our minimal needs. And anything that's above our minimal needs, we should share it with others. So we have to have what's called a minimalist life. We do not eat more than we need. We do not sleep more than we need. We do not work more than we need. So that minimalist life makes things very easy. Okay, so we'll hear more about that soon. The feature of the Lord by which he is present everywhere is called Paramatma. Atma means the individual soul, and Paramatma means the individual super soul. But Atma and Paramatma are individual persons. The difference between Atma and Paramatma is that the Atma, or the soul, is present only in a particular body, whereas the Paramatma is present everywhere. In this connection, the example of the sun is very nice. An individual person may be situated in one place, but the sun, even though a similar individual entity is present on the head of every individual person. And so, like, on a sunny day, everyone feels presence of the sun on their head, by the heat and the light. In the same way, the Paramatma is present everywhere. That means that the form of Krishna in four arms is present everywhere, in every atom and in the heart of every living entity. In this connection, the example of the sun is very nice. An individual person may be situated in one place, but the sun, even though a similar individual entity, is present on the head of every individual person. In Bhagavad Gita, this is explained. Therefore, even though the qualities of all entities, including the Lord, are equal, the super soul is different from the individual soul by the quantitative power of expansion. So that means we can't expand our body. We only have one body, but Krishna can expand infinite bodies of himself. The Lord, or the super soul, can expand himself into millions of different forms, whereas the individual soul cannot do so. So that's one of the many differences between Krishna and the living entity. So if anyone tells you that he's God, then you say, well, God or Krishna, he can multiply himself infinitely. Can you please show me your infinite expansions? No, obviously they can't, because they're not God. The super soul, being seated in everyone's heart, can witness. One time I met this man, and he said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "No, I don't know who you are." They took a card out from his pocket, and handed it to me, and it said, Rosicrucian organization certifies that this gentleman, and his name is an incarnation of God. I had a card like that. Right? So I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yes, what is it?" I said, "How did you become God?" He said, "Well, I smoked a little bit of marijuana, and then I did some, yoga, and then I became God." I said, "Now I know you're a fake." He said, "What do you mean I'm a fake?" I said, "No one becomes God. God is always God. So if you say you became God, that means you're not God." So he got really confused when I said that. I said, God is always God. You don't become God, right? And that's a fact. Krishna is eternally present. He's not someone who does some yoga magic uh, exercises and becomes God. So, okay, so Prabhupada says the super soul is different from the individual soul by quantitative power of expansion. The Lord, or the super soul, can expand himself into millions of different forms, whereas the individual soul cannot do so. So this is another way to separate the fake so-called gods from real God. They should be able to expand themselves infinitely, like Krishna does. The super soul, being seated in everyone's heart, can witness everyone's activities, past, present, and future. In the Upanishads, the super soul is described as being seated with the individual soul as friend and witness. As a friend, the Lord is always anxious to get back his friend, the individual soul. Yeah, we all come from Krishna. So Krishna doesn't like to see us suffering in the material world. Just like, if there's a parent and their son or daughter, runs away, and they're not happy about that, and they want the son or the daughter to come back. Right? The same way we're all children of Krishna. We all come from Krishna. He's not happy when we're suffering in the material world and ignoring him. And he's much more anxious for us to come back to Godhead than we are, right? So when you realize that, then you get a little bit more sober about life and the goal of life. So it says here, the Lord is always anxious to get back his friend, the individual soul, and bring him back home, back to Godhead. As a witness, he is the bestower of all benedictions, and he endows each individual with the result of his actions. In other words, he will give all benedictions to a living entity, and also he will give each living entity what they deserve by their actions, or meaning karma. The supersoul gives the individual soul all facilities to achieve whatever he desires to enjoy in this material world. Suffering is a reaction to the living entity's propensity to try to lord it over the material world. But the Lord instructs his friend, the individual soul, who is also his son, to give up all other engagements and simply surrender unto him for perpetual bliss and an eternal life full of knowledge. This is the last instruction of Bhagavad Gita, the most authorized and widely read book on all varieties of yoga. Thus, the last word of Bhagavad Gita is the last word in the perfection of yoga. So, what does that mean? That means that Krishna wants all living entities to come back to him because we were all with him originally. And that he doesn't like to see the living entities, you and me, suffering in the material world, birth, death, old age, and disease. That's not who we are. That's what our body experiences, but we have an eternal soul, and Krishna doesn't like to see our soul always entangled in sense gratification in the material world. And here it says, suffering is a reaction to the living entity's propensity to try to lord it over the material world. So I was speaking to this one Indian boy who just had graduated high school. And I said to him, well, what do you want to be? And he said, well, I want to, like my father, I want to be a businessman. I said, well, when you become a businessman and there's an opportunity to get rich by cheating, would you do it? He said, well, if I thought I could get away with it, I would do it. Now, how did he learn that? He was only like 17, 18 years old. How did he learn that? If I could get away with it, I would do it. See, it's unbelievable what kids pick up in their schools or in their discussions, or if I could get away with it, I would do it.
Observing parents.
Huh?
Observing his parents.
Maybe, yeah, definitely. There was this one man, an Indian guy. He was cheating on his wife, going around with other women. And I asked him one day, I said, why did you do that? I said, such a bad thing. And in a sense, it's stupid because it's ruined your life. He said, well, I thought I could do it. In other words,
I could get away with it.
I thought I could get away with it, right? And you can't get away with anything. I mean, there's Paramatma is in the heart. You can't get away with anything. You know? But these people, they think they can get away with things. Like, for example, everybody knows, if you rob a bank, you're going to eventually get caught, right? There's so much history about that. But still, people try to rob banks, Sometimes they're not very expert at it, so they just walk into a bank and point the gun at the teller at the bank, say, give me all your money, And the teller said, okay, okay. And they quietly put their hand underneath the bank table there, and they push a button, and then they and then they give the money to the man. And as soon as he goes outside, the police are waiting for him because that little button connects to the police, you know. So, by the way, nowadays, even though there are bank heists, and stealing from banks, they don't go in with a gun anymore because they're going to get caught right away. So now they know how to go in through the ceiling at night of the bank, and before they go in, they already have uh, demobilized all the security systems. I mean, they're smart people now. They study it, and then they get in through the ceiling, and they rob the bank, and they go out, and no one hears about it, no one knows about it until the next morning. You know, they become very sophisticated thieves. High tech uh, robbery. It is stated in the Bhagavad Gita that a person who is always absorbed in Krishna consciousness is the topmost yogi. What is Krishna consciousness? As the individual soul is present by his consciousness through his entire body, so the super soul of Paramatma is present throughout the whole creation by super consciousness. This super consciousness energy is imitated by the individual soul who has limited consciousness. In other words, key word in that sense is imitated. The super consciousness energy is imitated by the individual soul who has limited consciousness. I can understand what is going on within my limited body, but I cannot feel what is going on in another's body. I am present throughout my body by my consciousness, but my consciousness is not present in another's body. The super soul or Paramatma, however, being present everywhere and within everyone, is also conscious of everyone's existence. The theory that the soul and the super soul are one is not acceptable because it is not confirmed by authoritative Vedic literature. The individual soul's consciousness cannot act in super consciousness. This super consciousness can be achieved, however, by dovetailing individual consciousness with the consciousness of the Lord, of the Supreme. This dovetailing process is called surrender or Krishna consciousness. From the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, we learn very clearly that Arjuna, in the beginning, did not want to fight with his brothers and relatives. But after understanding Bhagavad Gita, he dovetailed his consciousness with the super consciousness of Krishna. He was then in Krishna consciousness. Okay, well, what does that mean in plain English? In plain English is he surrendered to Krishna and now began to follow Krishna's instructions. So that's what he's talking about here. And this is what the real purpose of life is. It's to understand our relationship with Krishna. We're the eternal servant of the Lord. And when we act as the servant of the Lord by only following the instructions given by Krishna and offering everything to Krishna, then we become a real yogi. A yogi is not the one that's doing the asanas. The real yogi is the one who's connected to Krishna 24 hours a day and performing devotional service. So the definition of yoga that you see in the book, the dictionaries, is incorrect. It's not the real definition. The real definition is you become a pure devotee of the Lord and spend your whole life pleasing the Lord through acts of devotion. A person in full Krishna consciousness acts by the dictation of Krishna. That is, whatever Krishna tells us to do, that's what we do. We don't act contrary to Krishna's dictation or Krishna's instructions. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, dictation is received through the transparent medium of the spiritual master. When one is sufficiently trained and acts in submissive faith and love for Krishna under the direction of the bona fide spiritual master, the dovetailing process becomes more firm and accurate. This stage of devotional service by the devotee and Krishna consciousness is the most perfect stage of the yoga system. At this stage, Krishna, or the super soul, dictates from within, while from without, the devotee is helped by the spiritual master, who is the bona fide representative of Krishna. From within, he helps the devotee as Chaitya, where he is seated within the heart of everyone. So Chaitya means Krishna, who is in the heart, giving instructions to the living entity. So the living entity receives instructions in two ways. One, through Guru and Shastra and Sadhu, and two, by Krishna in the heart. Okay. So a person in full Krishna consciousness acts by the dictation of Krishna. Dictation means Krishna is ordering someone to do something. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, dictation is received through the transparent medium of the spiritual master. When one is sufficiently trained and acts in submissive faith and love for Krishna under the direction of the bona fide spiritual master, the dovetailing process becomes more firm and accurate. Dovetailing means connecting with Krishna. This stage of devotional service by the devotee in Krishna consciousness is the most perfect stage of the yoga system. At this stage, Krishna, or the super soul, dictates from within, while from without, the devotee is helped by the spiritual master, who is the bona fide representative of Krishna. So we become instructed in two ways. From within our heart, Krishna will give us give instruction, and outside by the bona fide representative of Krishna. So if inside from Krishna says one thing and outside the Guru says something else, then you know there's a big problem. At this stage, Krishna, or the super soul, dictates from within, while from without, the devotee is helped by the spiritual master, who is the bona fide representative of Krishna. From within, he helps the devotee as Chaitya, where he is seated within the heart of everyone. Chaitya means the presence of Krishna in the heart of the living entity. Understanding that God is God is seated within everyone's heart is not, however, sufficient. One has to be acquainted with God from both within and without. That means you have to any message you get from your heart cannot be different than what you're hearing from your guru. Otherwise, there's a disconnect. One has to be acquainted with God from both within and without. And one must take dictation from within and without to act in Krishna consciousness. This is the highest perfectional stage of the human form of life and the topmost perfection of all yoga. So if there's some dictation from within, in other words, from within you're thinking, oh, I'm going to engage in this type of sense gratification. And then from without, the guru is saying, don't do this, don't do that. That means there's a big problem. That means whatever is being dictated to you from within is not from Krishna. It's from some other source, because it's different than what the guru is saying. You know?
So in
Okay.
this case, we should follow Guru Maharaj.
Yes, definitely. From your heart, you might be saying, like, do this, do that. The guru's saying, don't do this, don't do that. So, you have to follow the guru's instruction then. From within, he helps the devotee as Chaitya, where he is seated within the heart of everyone. That means Chaitya means the presence of Krishna in the heart. Understanding that God is seated within everyone's heart is not, however, sufficient. One has to be acquainted with God from both within and without. And one must take dictation from within and without to act in Krishna consciousness. This is the highest perfectional stage of the human form of life and the topmost perfection of all yoga. See, so if from within you feel as if Krishna is telling you, actually it's not Krishna. Maya is actually dictating and saying, now you should eat this, piece of meat. But from without, Krishna says, no meat, no fish, no eggs, right? So you see, sometimes the dictation can be from Maya within, right? And if it doesn't correspond with what Krishna says, then don't do it. Even though you got the dictation from within, that you're yearning for something that is actually not good for your spiritual life. Okay, so for a perfect yogi, there are 8 kinds of super achievements. One can become lighter than air, one can become smaller than the atom, one can become bigger than a mountain, one can achieve whatever he desires, one can control the Lord, and so on. But when one one can control like the Lord, and so on. But when one rises to the perfectional stage of receiving dictation, or in other words, you're hearing from Krishna, from the Lord, that is greater than any stage of material achievements above mentioned. The breathing exercise of the yoga system, which is generally practiced, is just the beginning. Meditation on the supersoul is just another step forward. But to obtain direct contact with the supersoul and take dictation from him is the highest perfectional stage. The breathing exercises of meditation practice were very difficult even 5,000 years ago. Otherwise, Arjuna would not have rejected the proposal of Krishna that he adopt the system. This age of Kali is called the fallen age. In this age, people in general are short-living and very slow to understand self-realization or spiritual life. They are mostly unfortunate, and therefore, if someone is a little bit interested in self-realization, he is likely to be misguided by so many frauds. The only way to realize the perfect stage of yoga is to follow the principles of Bhagavad Gita as practiced by Lord Chaitanya. This is the simplest and highest perfection of yoga practice. Lord Chaitanya demonstrated this Krishna consciousness yoga system in a practical manner simply by chanting the holy name of Krishna, as prescribed in the Vedanta, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and many important Puranas. So the highest level of yoga practice is chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. So don't be fooled by the yogis who twist their body like a pretzel, do all kinds of different, positions and so forth. That's all nonsense. It's also a waste of time. Okay, so next. The largest number of Indians follow this yoga process. And in the United States, it is gradually spreading in many cities. It is very easy and practical for this age, especially for those who are serious about success in yoga. No other process of yoga can be successful in this age. In other words, the chanting of Hare Krishna. The meditation process was possible in the golden age, Satya Yuga, because people in that age used to live for hundreds of thousands of years. If one wants success in practical yoga practice, it is advised that he take to the chanting of Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. And he will actually feel himself making progress. In Bhagavad Gita, this practice of Krishna consciousness is prescribed as Raja Vidya, or the king of all erudition. Erudition means knowledge and realization. Those who have taken to this most sublime bhakti yoga system, who practice devotional service and transcendental love of Krishna, can testify to its happy and easy execution. In other words, testify means they can tell you, hey, look, since I've been chanting Hare Krishna, I'm very happy, and I'm not going to go back to doing all the nonsense I did before. So that's a testimonial from people who are actually now chanting Hare Krishna. Those who are taken to this most sublime bhakti yoga system, who practice devotional service and transcendental love of Krishna, can testify to its happy and easy execution. The four sages, Sanaka, Sanatana, and Sanandana, and Sanat Kumara, also became attracted by the features of the Lord and the transcendental aroma of the dust of his lotus feet, as already described in verse 43. Yoga necessitates controlling the senses, and Bhakti Yoga, or Krishna consciousness, is the process of purifying the senses. When the senses are purified, they are automatically controlled. So how do you purify the senses? You engage them in devotional service and especially chanting Hare Krishna mantra. One cannot stop the activities of the senses by artificial means, but if one purifies the senses by engaging in the service of the Lord, the senses not only can be controlled from rubbish engagement, but can be engaged in the Lord's transcendental service as aspired to by the four sages, Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanat Kumara. Krishna consciousness is not therefore a manufactured concoction of the speculative mind. It is the process enjoined in Bhagavad Gita 9:34, Manmanabhava Mad Bhakto Mad Yajimam Namaskuru. Always think of me, always worship me, and always bow down to me. That's what it means. Manmanabhava Mad Bhakto Mad Yajimam Namaskuru. Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
So it's very easy to be Krishna conscious in this age. You just chant Hare Krishna, right? Take only prasadam. You will go back to God in this lifetime. Krishna has made, Lord Chaitanya has made it very easy. But sometimes people go, oh, that's too easy. Give me something harder to do. They can't even do the easy thing, and they're asking to do something harder. No, we should just stick with Lord Chaitanya's program. So any questions? Haribol. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Any questions?
Hare Krishna, any questions online?
Maharaj, one
Yes.
one paragraph. The last line was the Lord or the super soul can expand himself into millions of different forms,
Yes.
whereas the individual soul cannot do so.
Yes.
So when it says millions of different forms, is it referring to super soul or some other forms? It says different forms.
Yeah. Well, it can be Lord Chaitanya. It can be Balaji. It can be,
All incarnations.
all these different forms. Yeah. It can be Shingadev. All the different forms, all transcendental also. They're not, and any of those forms are not subject to Maya. So when Prahlad Maharaj saw Nrsimhadev, he was not afraid. He said, oh, it's another form of my Lord Krishna. Whereas Kashipu was really frightened. But Prahlad wasn't afraid because he recognized this is an incarnation of Krishna. The devotee is not frightened by different forms of Krishna. And then Prahlad, everybody else was afraid, but they asked Prahlad to put a garland on the Shingadev. But Prahlad's mother was afraid, and everybody else was afraid, but they gave the flower garland to Prahlad because Prahlad wasn't afraid because he was recognizing that Nrsimhadev is an incarnation of Krishna. So he went and put a garland on Nrsimhadev, and then Nrsimhadev sort of calmed down because of Bhakta Prahlad. Yeah. Yeah, when you see the power of Krishna, a lot of people get frightened, but the devotee doesn't, because he knows that, okay, this is the power of Krishna. like there's a hurricane or a tornado or an airplane that's, looks like it's going to crash. The devotee just keeps chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. I was once in an airplane and started going down, and everybody was really worried. I just started chanting Hare Krishna, and fortunately, it didn't crash, but it went down very fast. But then they were able to straighten the flight. And why did they go down very fast? Because the weather sometimes, it's very cold out, it's 35,000 feet in the air. I think it's very, very cold. And the airplane pilots, saw that there was freezing taking place on the airplane. And that can be very dangerous. So they went down very quickly, to much lower altitude. But it looked like, the plane might crash. They went down so fast. So everyone was worried. And then when you see
It's drop.
the things drop from the ceiling,
The mast.
the mast, that means, there's going to be some problems, And all the masts came down. And everyone put them on, everyone was worried. But fortunately, nothing happened. They straightened the flight. Able. Okay, so we'll stop right there. Unless there's
Maharaj, one question, quick question.
yes.
Maharaj, when we are chanting, because here we see that we need to remember Krishna in four-arm form. That's what it is emphasized in this sloka. Now, when we are chanting, whether we need to remember Krishna in two-arm or four-arm, or how we should do the chanting.
Well, the original form of Krishna is two-armed. But he also has a four-arm form as Vishnu. So either one you can meditate on. Either one. Like, for example, when Prabhupada was with us, we were all meditating on Krishna in his two-arm form. Temples. I mean, Krishna's expansions are complete, perfect and complete. So whether it's the two-arm form or the four-arm form, there's no difference. It's the same Supreme Personality of God. Some people like to meditate on the four-arm form of Krishna, and some people like to meditate on the two-arm form of Krishna. It's a matter of taste, or your let's say you prefer one thing more than the other. So either way, you're still meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so it's not that one is better than the other. They're both the same thing, same person. But Krishna can have an eight-arm form. He can have, many different forms, but he's still Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And doesn't it say here? We just read that. He can affirm. He can take up any form he wants. Let's see where it says that. Anyway, but we like, the form of Krishna in its two-arm form as Sham Sundar.
So here it says, Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all other Vishnu forms, with four-handed decorated with conch, lotus, club, and wheel, are plenary expansions of Krishna.
Yes. But when it says Chintamani Prakadasadma Sukalpa Riksha Laksha Vritesha Surabir Abhipaliantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambram Sevyamanam Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Usually that's referring to Krishna as two-armed form and as Sham Sundar. So that's like the I'm not going to say the best form, but that's like the form that most genuine devotees, or pure devotees, meditate on. But they also know that all forms of Krishna are transcendental.
Sure. And one more just clarification on the same subject, Maharaj. See, when
Yes.
we are chanting, one is we need to have remember Krishna's form. Along with that, we need to remember even Radharani also, because in yoga, that's not mentioned here. How we should look into that, Maharaj. Whether we need to
Well, that's
pray
why
Radha Krishna or just Krishna.
we do meditate on Radha Krishna. Why? Because Radharani is Krishna's internal energy of love and devotion. So it's very important to meditate on Radha and Krishna, not just Radha, but Radha and Krishna. Some people just like to meditate on Radharani, but Radharani feels very uncomfortable because she always wants her Krishna to be next to her. So yeah, you can meditate on Radha and Krishna. There's no problem with that. That's what we do in the temple. We bow down to Radha and Krishna.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you,
Yeah.
Maharaj.
Haribol.
At the end of the first paragraph, Maharaj, there is another line. This Narayana form is Krishna's extension. Therefore, the Krishna consciousness movement, which is now spreading, is the real topmost process of yoga practice.
Yes.
End of first paragraph.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah, so I mean, look, Krishna can assume any form he wants. That's what we have to take out of this. He can assume any form. And because he's the father of all living entities, sometimes he can assume the form of animals, of insects, because he's trying to help all living entities come back to Godhead. Yeah. So he's not restricted in any way. But some people, they say, well, I like the form of Nrsingadev. Some other people say, well, I like the form of Krishna as Kurma, or this incarnation, that incarnation. So everybody has different tastes, right? But they're all Krishna. Okay, so we'll stop right there today, my dear friends, my dear devotees, and continue tomorrow on text 46. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Hare
Srimad Bhagavad